Welcome to Life Support Live. My name is Dr. Ali Mattu, and I am joined, as always, by my colleague right over there.
Yes, it's Larry Nemecek, Dr. Trek. And one of us is a real doctor.
We'll leave it to you to figure out who. Welcome to Life Support Live. This is the weekly show that explores how Star Trek can help us to boldly go in our own lives, better ourselves, and the rest of humanity.
Yes. And along the way, as a famous Starfleet captain once said, also, we'll have a little fun. And maybe even ruffle a few feathers. Because I think
we'd ruffle a lot today.
Yes, I think these are the days that if we talk about mental health, we're going to be ruffling feathers whichever way we turn. Again.
Well, and we've chosen to take on a very easy topic this week. You know, after talking about race in America and gatekeeping and fandom, we thought, let's do a very easy episode. So we have decided to take on misinformation and fake news.
Yeah, well, the easy one was last week, music, and it was
we had a lot of fun.
It was so easy that we kind of almost got drowned in chat last week. So I just
oh my gosh, it was so much fun.
Yeah, if we missed you last week in chat, please don't take it personal. We were like really, really drowned. Just to say.
So we're going to be talking about how do you know what you don't know. How do you know when you've been manipulated? How do you know who to trust in this kind of situation? So let's get the conversation started. In the comments, let us know, what's your favorite Star Trek episode that deals with truth or lies? What's the best Star Trek episode that deals with truth or lies? Let us know in the comments below. Larry, when we sat down to talk about this, we didn't think there would be much that Star Trek has to say about this, and then it was very clear. Oh yes, there is a lot Star Trek has to say. So we're gonna dive into it. We should get
someone came in like an academic and kept expanding the definition. I thought, well then we're this, and okay, well they're that. So right, we've got a full plate as usual.
We got a full plate. If this is your first time at Life Support Live, welcome. We have a lot of fun here. We talk about how Star Trek can help us to understand this world that we're in right now. You can also join the show live. So if you comment below, we're going to take some of those comments. We put them on screen. We have parts of the show where we're talking more with each other, more with you all. So welcome. We'd love to have you on the show. You can also join at the end when we open up hailing frequencies. If you send us a message at Life Support Live Host on Skype, or you can see the name right over there, Life Support Live Host on Skype. There's always an opportunity to bring you on the show, and you can be right there. You can be this way. I keep pointing to the same way. No,
it's just opposite. It's wrong. It's opposite.
Well, you have some more rectagino. I don't know what I'm doing there.
Speaking of our chat group, everybody's got it already. In fact, they think that you're not wearing red or blue by wearing gray. You must be a deep fake.
Well.
Thank you, Jared.
I'm wearing thank you for that. I am wearing a shirt that I don't really I haven't worn in a very long time for very specific reasons. Today's the first Life Support Live where I'm not wearing a Star Trek shirt. So I'm wearing this shirt. Yeah. So I don't know how I feel about this shirt anymore, Larry. Well,
I think your fake news shirt is fake news. I don't think really
that's the problem. That's the problem. I got this shirt when this term was first coined, and since then it's become like what does this shirt even mean? I wear this shirt, and I think I just confuse everyone. I confuse liberals. I confuse conservatives. No one really knows, including myself. I don't know what this means anymore. But no, I am. That's what I'm wearing. So let's get into the briefing room here.
Yep.
Larry, let's kind of dive into this because we've got a lot to talk about. Yep. The briefing room is where we get oriented and we really talk about this topic as it relates to Star Trek. So, Larry, I think one of the reasons why we want to talk about this is, this is a show about Star Trek and mental health. And how does fake news and misinformation feed into that? Well,
it's crazy. That's how
it. It's quite difficult to navigate this world. And one of the ways I've been thinking about it this week, Larry, is, I became very frustrated with the knowledge and information we have about the coronavirus. And our knowledge is always expanding and evolving and growing. But in the last few weeks, there seems to be more scientific consensus that the best way to prevent this is not only social distancing, but also wearing a face mask. And I don't know if you remember this, but in the very early part of this pandemic, in the United States, there wasn't that big of a push.
Wait, are you talking about, hold on, like March?
Yes. Yes.
That was like 3 months ago or whatever.
It's hard to really remember that time, but you remember the before times where we could give handshakes and eat at restaurants? And
the old ones.
Yeah.
From the before times.
In America, there really wasn't much emphasis on wearing face masks. And the emphasis was more on cleaning your hands, not touching your face, and not touching other surfaces. So this is not fake news or misinformation, but it is lack of information, uncertain information. It made me immediately think, and all of that has been very stressful for me and frustrating for me. I wish we knew that back then. And that immediately made me think of a Deep Space Nine episode, The Quickening. Something that our chat has mentioned before in a previous episode. Right. But in that episode, Julian Bashir is on a mission to save a planet from a virus, and right. He thinks he thinks he solved it, but he's nowhere near solving it.
Boy Genius comes up short, yes.
Yeah, Boy Genius comes up short. A wonderful Bashir episode. I would say the first great Bashir episode. But that episode, I think about that now, and I think this is the exact situation we're in. There's so much we don't know, and we think we know something, and then a few months later we're realizing, no, that's not even the case. And this isn't even intentional misinformation or fake news.
See, what got me as we were planning the show was I think about misinformation and fake news as manipulation, as someone's strategy, yes. Someone has an agenda, and you brought up, but that's on their end. But on our end, it's whether it's fake news and misinformation, and we know it or we don't know it. We also don't know what we don't know. Starting to sound like
I know you're starting to sound like, yeah.
But we don't know what we don't know, whether it's anyone's fault or not. We talked about uncertainty in one of the earlier episodes, whether it's intentional or not. But when it comes down to our side, us keeping our sanity and our anxiety, we've talked about that. It's almost like these all are part of one big tapestry of mental health.
Yes.
Ollie. But yeah, I
see what you did there with tapestry. I like how you're just name dropping my favorite episodes of Star Trek.
It's your favorite. Oh, I thought it was just like part of the thread of the show here, but
it's in my top two. My other favorite is right there. Okay. Right there in the Pale Moon Night.
Oh, there we go. You just love the Q Picard bed scene. I know you.
Is there a Jean-Luc Picard here? There you go. That's impression number one, Q.
I refuse to believe that you are the afterlife, Q.
Impression number two there, Larry.
I'm joining the Ali Bad Impressions Club.
Yes, it's joined. All are welcome.
Yes. But are you of the bad impressions? Yes. No, what I'm trying to get to here is when you expanded that out to include, even the times when we just are uncertain, it's how it reflects on us. It's not about the intention, it's about how it's affecting it. And the sincerely unknown mixes in with the intentionally unknown. And I guess is what you're trying to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we need a definition for fake news, I would say, and misinformation, it's false information with the intention to persuade or to distract or to get someone to believe like you are trying to get someone to believe something that is not true, which is different than information that's not presently available, which I think is the case with the coronavirus. But if we step beyond what I was talking about here and the mental health of that, there's another big implication in terms of mental health, in terms of believing fake news and how that might impact relationships that you have with friends and family and acquaintances on social media. It can impact your anger, your despair, it can create, it intentionally is so emotional. We'll talk about that in the counselor's log. But there's a wide variety of ways in which misinformation and fake news impacts your mental health. First and foremost, in terms of just creating anxiety. What the heck do I believe?
Okay. I got one for you, Mr. Fancy Pants Doctor.
Hit me, Dr. Trek.
We've talked about intentionally manipulate, fake news, misinformation meant to intentionally manipulate. We've talked about it when it's sincerely a gap in information.
Yes.
What about when we do it to ourselves? What
Tell me
about
more.
we
Tell me
come
more
up
about that.
and we're, I don't know, what are we, baffled in life and we try to connect the dots, but we do it in a sadly wrong way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, we don't need maybe an organized body out there feeding it to us. I'm thinking like Voyager conspiracy and Seven.
Yes.
And she goes all Glenn Beck on herself.
Yeah. So let's walk through Voyager conspiracy a little bit. Tell me more about that episode.
Well, it's I think the premise is the key there. The whole point is that Seven's experimenting with a new way because she's just the iron robot, and she thinks if she just continually downloads more information into herself of all the technology available on her board, access points, that she'll just be more efficient and that much, perfection attained. And she overloads even herself and starts seeing so much information. She's trying to make sense of it and is, yes, classically connecting all the wrong dots and drawing and then she infects everybody around her. She infects Janeway and Chakotay, and they're not trusting each other, and she's seeing conspiracies everywhere.
Yeah.
The only way to explain all this is, no, it could all be, 47 random different occurrences.
Right.
So she's got to connect the dots in a crazy way.
So what I love about that episode, Larry, is it's such a excuse me, Dr. Trek. What I love about that episode is that it really well represents the way we understand information. A lot of people think that we have a scientist in here. We have an internal scientist that's weighing new information, evaluating against old information, trying to see what is the most accurate. And no, we do not have an internal scientist. We have an internal lawyer. One of the things our mind does very well is it comes up with arguments that back up our existing beliefs and our existing behaviors. Our mind is very, very good at that, at creating stories that explain what we've done. And the other thing that our mind is very good at, it's a very, very good association machine. This is something that has kept us alive. Our ancestors, if they were walking by a certain area and they saw a bush that, a few weeks ago, a tiger had jumped out of that bush, they're already going to be anxious seeing that bush and they're going to avoid it. Or if you eat some type of food, you got food poisoning, just smelling or looking at that food makes you feel sick again. That's a process called classical conditioning. So our mind is very good at that. At
connecting on the terms start flowing. There you go.
But you want to talk about classical conditioning, behavioralism, operant conditioning. I could give you terms. I try to spare everyone from the jargon.
Maybe say that for the counselor's log. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I as much as I love Techie the Tech, I try to avoid doing it as much as possible. But we're quite good at forming associations. And Larry, that's not just about experiences, but about stories, about facts, about putting these things together. And the unfortunate truth here is a lot of the big complicated things that happen in life, we don't have an easy explanation for it. We don't have an easy story that explains what happened. And in that absence, our mind is very good at creating stories or filling in the gaps or believing stories that fill in those gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And my goodness, Larry, the episodes coming in from the chat section. Some of these we have in our list. Some of these we don't. The First Duty. Johannes is mentioning The First Duty. Of course, Linda says it's a fake. My favorite episode in the Pill Midnight.
Yeah. Everybody was off and running. Some that I didn't think about even down here. Once Upon a Time on Voyager, where Jared says where Neelix can't tell the truth to Naomi about her mother, and he diplomatically lies, little white lies, which, well, really expanding things out here.
Well, and that's a question that often comes up is how much truth can you reveal to children about the horrible past that they or their family might have experienced. Sometimes we don't tell them the complete truth. And is that good? Is that bad? How much can they developmentally understand at their age? Zahir mentions Voyager Omega Directive. Oh, we didn't even think about that one, Larry. When we made our short list, Voyager seemed to have the most episodes that directly dealt with this topic. Yes. I don't know what that means. I
think it's Brannon being the main showrunner there or something, after a fashion. And Dan has the short treks, The Escape Artist, with the multiple muds at the end.
Oh! We didn't even think about that one. That's great. Say that
3 times fast. Multiple muds.
That's a great, multiple muds. I love that. Should have been the name.
Exactly, sipping sippers on a beach somewhere, but
Libby says DS9 Rules of Acquisition, which is, although it's not one.
They fake the Neguses. Yes.
Yeah.
I've had so many. I never thought of this at the time, but this is like the second time it's come. Like, whose body, desiccated remains were in those discs he was trying to peddle, and I just think they're ginger or something. I don't know, or whatever.
Yeah, there are so many episodes that are coming up here. There's so much for us to talk about. So we've kind of talked about how you can convince your way out of stuff. We've also talked about not knowing all the information and Julian Bashir and everything he was going through in that episode. I think I forgot to put up the image from that one, but we do have the image pulled. There we go. There it is. Larry, what about misinformation in terms of history? This was an idea you brought up, and I really love this idea.
Well, it's not only do we think about misinformation and fake news and propaganda like in the moment, like what's the Nazis' big lie, or what's and it's a shit. I mean, politics is about shading, facts anyway, but there's shades of gray and then there's shades of black and white, or whatever, infrared and ultraviolet, I guess. But there's also a misinformation, and we're talking a lot about it right now. I think part of systemic, racism, part of system, and we've had Star Trek episodes about this. Remember on Voyager that I've mentioned already in context of prejudice, but there's a cultural conspiracies that they pile up over the generations, right? And we have that, and guess what, kids? We've got that on 2 or 3 fronts at least here in the States. Sadly, with our treatment of African Americans and treatment of Native Americans, and you could go back through history and spread it around. The British Empire is great about it everywhere they colonized.
Yeah,
it seems to be attached to a lot of colonizers, but even apart from that, just the missing history, the lost history, it gets. But there's that old trite phrase: "History is written by the victors."
Yes.
And and Victor has been very active on a lot of fronts. But when it's sustained over generations and it fades, it's easy to think of something. That's where my mind has been lately. I said this yesterday. I didn't know. I had vaguely heard about Juneteenth.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a food festival or something wacky, something like Groundhog Day or something funky. I didn't know until this week what it actually was. And then even then, after 2 or 3 days, I kept hearing, it's the date that a Union general sailed into Galveston Bay and told the slaves and slaveholders that the war, it was like a Battle of New Orleans type thing. The war had been over for 3 months, and the slaves were free, and the South lost. And I'm like, okay, so why is the thing in Texas so... Well, what's finally even took 2 or 3 days that I picked up on somewhere to say, it's not just that that's what happened on that day. That was the last group of slaves to find out that they were free, and to be forced into. The slave owners forced into. So in other words, it's like the day that finally everyone, the emancipation, we knew surely didn't do it because they didn't control all the territory. It was at war. Blah blah blah. But that was and technically not until the 13th Amendment. I'm also finding out now in December happened that the border state slaves were free.
Yeah.
But June 10th is important not just because of what it was that day, but because that was like the last big swath of slaves to find out they were free. So technically, that was really Emancipation Day or Liberty Day, Yeah. But I didn't know. What got me was I didn't know all that, and I was like a little embarrassed, but I was also pissed that. And I think I'm not a history major, although I could have been one in real life, and taught or researched. That was one of my career paths I could have gone. But it pissed me off that I'm still a pretty good history interest buff. I'll be a sucker for a documentary on anything. And I did not know that. And I was like angry. And I was almost like angry at my culture.
Yes, I completely relate to what you're saying here, Larry. I've experienced this myself in a few different ways. I remember very vividly experiencing this when I learned about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where the United States intentionally monitored how syphilis was breaking down the bodies of these black men. I think they were all men, and never really informed them that they had this disease. Kept medical treatments from them for decades, and we have. There are so many examples from all cultures, from all countries, where governments or people in power have intentionally hid the brutal details of aspects of their history. The genocide of the native people of North America is probably... people talk about slavery being our original sin. I think you go farther back than that, and the original sin of the settlers here in this land is the genocide of a people. And
not that history loves company. I'm just going to say wasn't aware of this either, but the Australians and Canadians have had their own, among others.
Yeah.
Have had a fair share of their natives, their Aboriginals, and some of that's coming to grips now. Some of that's coming to some kind of reparative status now too, along with the U.S. But
Dan's talking about misinformation, that the Holocaust didn't happen. There's so many examples of this going around, and there's examples of this in Star Trek as well. I think there's some really good examples. We were talking about 2 episodes, Larry. We're talking about the original series, The World is Hollow, and Star Trek Discovery New Eden as examples of this. You want to jump into The World is Hollow a little bit?
Again, we were just talking about intentionally lost information. Then there are the times, a lot of episodes, which give us the drama of so it wasn't anyone's intention, but people are living without the truth. Yes. It's not like it was a conspiracy to deny them the truth. And say the whole title with me, everybody. For the world is hollow, and I have touched the sky. It's amazing how he got from Talos 4 to Natiri's No, it's the people that forget that it's another computer society, but they forget that they're actually on the inside.
There's a lot of those in the original series.
And a lot of them fall into some we were realizing fall into our frame today a little bit. But that's one where the people don't realize they're on an asteroid. The only one that does know is the computer keeper. I've forgotten this one's name at the minute. But Natira is the high priestess, and she only knows what she's told, and she doesn't know. But when they come, here comes the Enterprise, just scanning away. They're trying to save them anyway, and here they come. And I'm sorry, we're scientists. We're just giving you the science. We're giving you the truth, and they can't handle it. They can't handle the truth. It's blasphemy. It comes through as religious dogma, and they can't handle that. And so that's the conflict in that episode. But what was the other one we were talking about? In New Eden, it's not quite so combative.
Yeah. But
it's a lost colony of humans brought away. and they have no idea that. Well, they kind of do, but they're separate, completely separated from Earth. They've been scooped up and brought over. And there's even episodes, and I'm thinking the 37s. I'm thinking on Voyager, the North Star on Enterprise. There's some good old alien abduction episodes out there. But that was kind of like, we all know those are aliens, and we all know they're abducting us, and we all know we're stuck on this planet. A way we've adapted. But
I think New Eden also.
Hmm?
Oh, well, one of the things I loved, on a side note, not related to misinformation and fake news, New Eden was one of the first episodes of Star Trek Discovery that really dived into the Prime Directive, or the idea of the Prime Directive as it exists in that time point. And it also just gave a lot of opportunity for Captain Pike to shine. I really love that episode. Just
say it, Ollie. Discovery was one of the first episodes of Discovery. That New Eden was one of the first episodes of Discovery that felt like Star Trek. That's what you're really trying to say. Oops. Okay.
Maybe. It felt like an episodic Star Trek episode that had social commentary. Yes.
I believe I said.
Our chat is bringing up so many examples of Star Trek as well as real life. People are talking about, don't forget the apartheid in South Africa. Absolutely. And there's also an example of I think South Africa is a really great example of what it means when we say minority, because the whites were smaller in number during apartheid, but they held all the power. So when we're talking about minority groups, it's often who has power and who doesn't. And it's the ones in power who rewrite the history. That's the British Empire was so good at that. I mean, the British Empire completely changed the Indian subcontinent and so many other areas for generations to come by controlling information, by controlling power, by controlling media, all of these kind of things. And we're seeing more examples here in the comments.
But you're saying, how about on Facebook, how about the TNG episode, not Second Chance? It's where Riker's trapped between Beverly's play and an alien psych hospital. And goes back.
Right. Beverly's play. I forgot
something
about
for
that.
Breakfast. I remember the play title before I remember the episode, but
And Tim mentioned Cambodia, Bosnia, Croatia, Rwanda. It's a horrible, never-ending history of human prejudice. There's a lot of
And what's the common thread in this tapestry everyone's coming up with? Humans. This is where Spock or Odo need to jump in and
or Quark.
Yes.
Linda has a good example. Worf's human brother deceiving a whole civilization that they're still on their planet while being transported to a new world. And Worf's brother's storyline in general, they wipe his memory. And he wishes to have his memory wiped as well, and really denying his history. And Worf saying that he has no siblings. He has no house really to belong to. Larry, there's an episode of Star Trek Voyager that I think takes us into a slightly different direction.
Yes.
So we've been talking about lost history, suppressed history. How about in censored history, Star Trek: The Next Generation, Pegasus? We didn't talk about that one yet, but that is hiding information, events for political purposes.
Yeah, it's classified. That's because it's embarrassing.
Right. If the Federation if Romulans found out the Federation was developing this phased cloak, it might completely change their political relationship with each other. So they hid that.
Upset the balance of power. Yes.
And it reminded me of the USS Maine. We were talking about that.
Yes.
Remember the Maine. Remember the Maine in the
Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War. Yeah.
There had been a lot of imperialistic Hearst, aka Citizen Kane, fictionalized. I'm just making words up right and left. But no, the Maine blew up, and everybody jumped. The tabloid press of the day, the right wing made up media of the day, the yellow journalists said, "Oh, look, the Spanish, it was sabotage, war." And it took, 10, 20 years later to go back, have an investigation and go, no, a boiler blew up,
Right.
next to it, they had too many like weapons stacked up next to something totally innocuous. But yeah, we went to war. We went to war on fake news. We went to war on false information.
Yeah, there's a long history of misinformation and fake news. This is not a recent phenomenon. We just got a great comment from Dan about, speaking of abductions, Little Green Men is a great example. And Cairo...
shout out to Dan. It's the Oracle of the People on Yonada. That's what I was... Yes, thank you, Dan.
And Cairo 47 means, oh, you mean like Spock saying we need to forget all about Discovery? And the crew of the USS Enterprise really hiding all information about the events of Star Trek Discovery, and Starfleet deciding, okay, we're just gonna forget. Let's forget about
something. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just forget about that mushroom network and everything that happened with this crew and all that. It's not called a mushroom network. What's it called, Larry? Not the shroom network.
But I like that.
The fungus network. What is it called?
The mycelial network.
Mycelial.
Your cereal, my cereal. Boy, we all cereal for my cereal. No, I love the Mushroom Network. You're listening to the Mushroom Network.
It grows very slowly, but once it's there, it spreads everywhere. Tim says that
dark and mushy. Yeah,
the Star Trek Voyager episode where the Voyager crew had to hide a group of telepaths from an alien race who were obviously modeled on Nazi ethnic cleansers. Yeah, absolutely.
They were Anne Franking the Vulcans.
So, and that gets to misinformation and misdirection for good. It speaks to how do you save people who are being persecuted.
On a personal level, boy, Dan's on fire today. Everybody's on fire today, I should say. Dark Page, where on a very personal level, where Lwaxana and Ian hide the fact that Deanna had a sister because they didn't want to hurt her.
Right.
I mean, some of this,
right.
I said white lies, but some of this, some misinformation, all that can be. That's why this is such an interesting topic.
Oh
this
my gosh!
Within a family, up to a social, to a global level.
So, Larry, let's talk about
is that we all react to it as an individual, whether it's cultural, big picture, or our own family. Oh, what do you mean? I was adopted?
Yeah. Let's talk about one of our favorite episodes of Voyager, Distant Origin.
Oh, yes.
This is a wonderful episode for a number of reasons. One, I just like that they had a dinosaur episode that came out the week before Jurassic Park: The Lost World. That was wonderful. Way to go, UPN. Good job on that. But Larry, you had a take, and I had. You had a take and I had a take. So this is an episode where the Voyager encounters a race that is essentially the descendants of dinosaurs from Earth. And you had a take. What was your take on this episode?
Well, my take was that it's an old retelling of Copernicus, of Ptolemy. Science versus the old classic thing here, science versus faith. And the faith had been that the Earth, in that example, the Earth was the center of the universe. And we're starting to have scientists in different eras come up and go, actually, we think the Earth goes around the sun with a bunch of other big balls of rock. Maybe this happens all over the place in other places. And no, heresy. And somebody has to be, if that's what you insist on believing, we have to smite you down for the good of the body, because that's too much of a challenge to the status quo worldview, which really gets down to it's a challenge to the status quo of our ego/power structure. So, put it in modern terms, here where scientists trying to speak truth to power and, shut down for it, either made to change or put to death. And that's what really struck me about this. And here you've got Voyager, Chakotay. For one thing, it's a Chakotay episode. Oh my God, with some meat to it. What a concept. But it's such a retelling of that. Much less the fact that it retcons something from basics that has nothing to do with anything. But I just thought that was amazing. But there were actually some good parts of Voyager that last throughout the years. No, and I always remember Jerry Taylor in our like end of the year dissection. She said, I feel like, and she retired after 4 years and when Brandon took over, but she retired from the business. But I always remember her saying that she always thought that Distant Origin was the most Roddenberry-esque of all the Voyagers up till then, because it was a big picture idea that got people thinking. And,
it was big. Yeah. It was big.
How big was it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic episode, and I recently rewatched it. Well, I recently rewatched all of Voyager about a year and a half ago, and was that 2019, 2018? I don't remember. But whenever I watched it, the way it read to me was climate change denial. That these politicians were being given new scientific information, and it was being denied for political purposes. So there's what's so beautiful about that episode, and what makes it so Roddenberry-esque is it is these big ideas that have specific social commentary that changes over time. Like people might watch that episode 50 years from now and say, "Oh, that's just like all those people, denying all that cybernetic implant science." I don't know what people are going to be talking about in 50 years. Hopefully, they're not talking about coronavirus. Hopefully, we're not talking about that anymore.
No, but that's a lot. When you say that over time, what springs to mind is original series, The Return of the Archons. Mm-hmm. And everybody being brainwashed, literally brainwashed into everybody gets along and they're all of the body. And then if you're not, you're absorbed, right? Or you're an outcast, or you hide it. And I've seen that episode banned, or I've read about that episode being banned in different cultures for totally different reasons.
Really?
Right. There's some cultures banned it because it was thought to be a comment on some of the socialist countries, the old communist countries, that were showing Star Trek would ban that one because they thought it was a ban on groupthink. We're all the body.
Right.
And there was the famous station in Texas in the 70s and 80s that banned it because they thought it was a comment on organized religion.
Right.
Christianity or any. I don't think they were defending Muslims. But I think they thought it was an affront to any organized religion, Christian religion. But I mean, it's almost like that old thing about, boy, when you've got everybody mad at you, you're probably doing something right.
Right. Always a good place for Star Trek to be is getting banned from different places. Speaking of looking at old episodes in a new modern light. Larry, this makes me think of a Deep Space Nine episode called The Armageddon Game. Do you remember this one? So
I do.
This is one where, is it O'Brien and Julian are being blamed?
Basis, yes.
Right. So there's these two warring species, and Julian and Bashir are
disarmed. They had this horrible bio weapon.
Yes.
It's the first time I'd really ever heard the term bioweapon used. But yeah, he was helping them disarm, and everything was supposed to be, we've been at war, and this was our doomsday weapon, only it was instead of being nuclear, it was a bioweapon, the harvesters. And they were helping them to defuse them and neutralize them and get rid of all their stockpiles. And then it turns out that there's like an Uber conspiracy, not unlike the right-wing Federation Klingon conspiracy that is trying to assassinate the peacemakers on Federation president. There was a high-level conspiracy.
You're talking Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country.
Yeah, Undiscovered Country. Yeah, we all knew it.
The Badmirals, the Badmiralty in there.
Yes, the ultimate Badmirals.
Yeah,
but the Bemirals on the Klingon side, I guess. But everything is a Bemiral. But the Armageddon game was about one planetary system and the two planets that had been at war forever, with distinctly different hairstyles. They made a big public show of destroying their weapons, and the Federation's going to help them, and here's the good guys from the Federation, only to find out that they get to the last little bit of the stockpile, and the conspiracy of the two is like, we can't totally let this get out. we can't totally trust that this won't come back. We have to keep these for self-defense. We're going to tell our publics, that we've gotten rid of it, and we'll be at peace. But it'll be this uneasy. It'll almost be like Taste of Armageddon, where the two planets agreed to have a computer war at the expense of their people. We'll be at peace by keeping our war in a box.
Well, and this is all predicated.
But the thing you'll love about Armageddon game
Yeah.
is that with Bashir and O'Brien is that not only is there this uber conspiracy where the last of those bioweapons is kept, but they try to tell Cisco and Keiko and all everybody back home that it was it was an explosion or something whatever happened, and they fake it's a fake here. They fake a tape, which it can't compare to the most famous DS9 fake of all. But people forget that they were deep faking, which is another part. It's a tool of misinformation, and our high-tech society has given us even more ways to be fooled or to be manipulated.
Yeah.
But that was a great example of the deep fake, deep state. No, how about the deep fake in action? Yeah.
Well, exactly. That's a part of that episode that now sticks out to me. Is it's about deep fake. So if you aren't familiar with deep fake technology, we're basically at the point.
This is the international symbol
for In the Pale Moonlight.
Yes, this is the international symbol for deep fake. It's a deep fake.
A deep fake. That's two more impressions there for those of you keeping score. It's the same one, but we keep doing it over, so I don't know if that one counts. But deepfake technology is when you take photos or videos of individuals. It really helps if there's a lot of videos of different angles of their face, and you're basically able to map on that face onto another body. There's a very famous example of this in Star Trek where individuals took Leonard Nimoy's face and put it on Zachary Quinto's body for Star Trek 2009 for one of those scenes there. And it's pretty convincing except in certain parts. And the more footage you have of someone, the more convincing and the better match it is to their body, to another body, the more convincing it is. Or you take someone's face and different words that they've said and just map it onto their own face. So this is how you can get Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump to say whatever you want, because we have so much video of them, and you can take different sound bites and you can create a video that's very convincing. And if you're scrolling through your Facebook feed or scrolling through Instagram or Twitter and you don't give it much thought, you might believe it's true. So it's highly concerning technology that's getting pretty close to the level of what we've seen in Star Trek, what we've seen with the holodeck, what has been used to manipulate all these species in Star Trek.
We haven't even, I don't even want to go there. I mean, we didn't talk about this pre-show, but even using the holodeck as Mission Impossible, the old classic Mission Impossible, where it's a holodeck within a holodeck.
Where
you're deep faking somebody in you're not just showing them an image as a deep fake. You're like deep faking them in real time in a 3D environment where they lose track of, and there's a couple other episodes where, it's like a tool of espionage. But what happens when you unleash that on an entire public, an entire society?
Dan just says Quark's face and Kira's body was another deep fake, LOL. And Jared says, if you want an example of a deep fake, just look at Ali. We know the real Ali does not wear gray on camera. I try not to, Jared. You're actually it is a good point. My background has a lot of grays in it, so wearing gray is not the best thing for me to wear. But
I'm sorry, you still there? You're just fading into nothingness.
A few more episodes I want to dive into, Larry. We didn't talk about Enterprise yet today, and there's a beautiful episode of Misinformation here, which is something you reminded me of, and then I said, oh yeah, I do like episodes of Enterprise, which is the Andorian incident.
Oh yeah. Now we're jumping around a little bit here. We're going personal, social, historical, intentional, unintended.
Because fake news is confusing, Larry. It's confusing.
I was going to say the part that I guess the common thread here is it's our reaction to this onslaught, whatever it comes from, and trying to be alert to it whether it's intentional, unintentional, historical, cultural. But yeah, the Andorian incident to me is the ultimate manipulation, because it's I don't know, confirmation bias or whatever. But you're going on your cultural, but you're going on your past history, everything you know, because even after 100 years, what do Earthmen from Sol 3 know? Vulcan, they're a little antagonistic, they're a little patriarchal, but Vulcan's good. Weird Andorian blue guys fight the Vulcans, and we're trying to be human noble here, and we're going to be the thing that shakes up the galaxy, because we're the guys that can connect the dots and rise above our foibles, supposedly. We've learned a hard lesson. But this episode totally is based on Vulcans good, the Andorians or anybody fighting Vulcans bad. And that last scene, when Shran is like, no, Shran is like everybody of a minority that finally got an iPhone. Shran and the Andorians, they were like, no, this is no. And they're like, oh, come on, it's just a bunch of Vulcan monks. It's a bunch of Vulcan. And when they walk through that circular arch, I don't know, do we have that? When they walk through that circular arch, and they're like, see, and Archer is stunned, and T'Pol is stunned because it's her people, and they walk in there, and it's a spy base for the Vulcans.
Right.
And it's like, oh my God, our friends had been screwing around with this the whole time, and it totally, in Star Trek, it totally equalized the Andorians out, and he and Shran, Shran will forever trust Archer to a big degree there, and they've made a friend, pink skin and all that. But it was a real, even as much as the whole, Velas is a Romulan plant ruining Vulcan, and they've totally strayed from, that's all a big picture. But this is like totally external. And you find out what that runaway, that militarized faction of Vulcans has been doing is, it's almost like the good guys strayed from their path somehow and had to be reminded of all this cultural sins they were creating, and had a third party, see that. I get applications of that in modern times. But
Zahir's sharing his impression as well in the comments. Why did you come here? Answer me, pink skin. That's actually... That does not sound like Jeffrey Combs at all.
Why did you come here? Yeah.
Why did you come here? I need the antennae, Larry. I don't have the antennae, but
and I don't have my remote control remote for you to run them. Yeah.
We also got a great comment from Rose, who says, well, what about the holodeck? It's a big fake, everything about it. And so here we're kind of talking about this is a way of thinking about fake and trueness that we haven't really thought about. And this gets back to not only imagination, but something we were talking about in a previous episode with Benjamin Sisko and Vix, and how everyone is welcome to Vix. But if you look at Las Vegas in that time frame, if you're a person of color, you would not have been welcome there. So what's the line there? And the debate over whether Sisko should go to Vix or not is a really great example of what I think Rose is getting at over here. Larry, there's 2 more episodes I want to talk about.
Can I say real quick?
Please.
So
yeah.
It's one of our newer, somebody, I don't know if he's been with us for long, but James Tuvel on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Hi, everybody on YouTube. There's more chatting going on Facebook, just so you know. And I haven't seen a Twitcher raise their head yet today. But
Cairo. Cairo's been commenting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We have our colony people over there, but I haven't seen any of the 12-year-olds over there yet. But so James Tuvel on YouTube said, it's all, and this is so, my friend Joseph from Germany, it's always easier to get people to believe a lie if they think everything is a lie, which is, the human use of chaos theory there. Keep everything stirred up and nobody can separate truth from fiction.
Well, I think that's exactly the problem with this term. And that's why I hate wearing the shirt that, if you can't see it, it says fake news and has a line over it. It's okay, everything has been labeled fake news, right? So how can you...
you're fake news. No, you're fake news. No, you're fake news. No, you're fake news.
Right. Yeah. It's a mess. So there's 2 episodes I want to talk about. Oh man, Cairo's mentioning such other great episodes: The Forge, Awakening, Kishara. The Andorian Vulcan human episodes of Enterprise are always my favorite. Who would have thought, when you focus on the conflict related to the founding members of the Federation, in addition to who are the 5 founding members? We had humans, Vulcans, Andorians.
I put up with this all the time. The world, the Tellarites.
The Tellarites, and
you're going old school retro. You're thinking Alpha Centauri from the tech manual, but Alpha Centauri was a colony of humans that was independent.
So it's really 4.
It's really Enterprise coalesced it to the 4. And see, once again, everybody, Tellarites, totally forgotten. But, okay,
Tellarites are forgotten. We need more Tellarite episodes.
I don't want to debate you about this, Ollie.
Do we have? Isn't there a Tellarite in Discovery? Don't we see one Tellarite?
Yeah. There've been Tellarites in Discovery. Yeah, they've been bikerified a little bit. I call it. Yeah.
Bikerified. I know you have a lot of deep love for the Tellarites. That is 100% true.
As an underdog, I really don't have this pig fetish or anything. I just always look out for the underdog. So I just think
it's a year with the impressions. There are 4 races. There we go. So there's 2 episodes I want to talk about in parallel with each other. So
species, actually.
The species, yes. Star Trek: The Next Generation, The First Duty. And I want to talk about In the Pale Moonlight, and I want to talk about them in relation to each other. Larry, you reminded me of The First Duty. The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth.
Is to the truth. Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
What's amazing is as we we always jump into, Voyager conspiracy, and it's a fake, Pale Moonlight. And we went through about 12, 13, 14, and a lot of them have been coming up in the chat today, even more. And it's part of this is like how finely or how broadly do we cast this net for defining, right? But then it was like, if you want to unifying all these different variations we've been talking about, governmental, individual, historical, in the moment, intentional, unintentional, just vacuum of knowledge. But everything comes to, as a beholder. The first duty is almost like the root of it all, the primary thread.
Yeah,
it is truth, and of course the debate comes in like, well, what is truth? What's your truth, my truth? What? And some of that's subjective. But when there can be facts, verifiable facts, and you know them, and you choose not to, and especially when it's on a personal level like this, it's about But if you're gonna if you're going to be some corrupt civilization that everybody's a cardboard villain, okay, fine, you don't care. But if you're supposedly upholding truth as a virtue and a goal, and that's the basis of your civilization, and you start hypocritically backing away from that, you're in trouble.
And we should remind everyone, if they don't remember this episode, Larry, this is where Wesley Crusher, a part of what was that?
It was the Nova Squadron.
The Nova Squadron. Yeah, and we see an early
stunt team. It was the Academy's stunt flying team,
featuring a non-Tom Paris in that episode.
He was, Nick Locarno. Yeah,
Wesley Crusher's a part of this team, this elite team, and they engaged in a risky maneuver, a starboard maneuver or something like that. I was going to say starburst.
The starboard cold burst. Now you're going to go into stuff here. Yeah.
But they one member of their team died.
There were 5, and then there were 4.
Yeah,
and they say that they were trying a simple maneuver, but they were really trying a stunty thing.
A starburst strawberry flavored maneuver, and one member of the team dies, and they cover it up. And Wesley has a crisis of conscience. Picard finds information. We also meet Boothby, I believe, in that episode, which is a great little detail there, who makes an appearance again in Star Trek Voyager, the botanist at Starfleet Academy. And Picard confronts Wesley, and there's that great moment where I think Picard is laying out Star Trek's thesis of the truth. That and this is something, Larry, as you and I were talking in the pre-show, that we really came to this place of understanding that Star Trek has a lot to say about the truth. In fact, more than I would argue every other topic we have ever touched on Life Support Live. And we've touched 10 of them. We've talked about 10 different things. This is our 10th episode. Is an exhaustive.
To our 10th anniversary party, everybody.
You're all welcome, which is good because you're all here right now. So I think Star Trek's clear thesis is in what Jean-Luc Picard says, that truth is the first duty of all of us. Mm-hmm. However, what we see in the pale moonlight is, I think, the flip side to the thesis. So while truth is the first duty, truth can be manipulated either from within you or outside. And I think that is what Star Trek has to say here, is the truth is incredibly important, and it's so easy to be manipulated by ourselves or by other people. And that's what, in the pale moonlight, this episode that's about the greater good, about bringing in the Romulans into the war at the expense of Sisko's conscience, at the expense of a Romulan senator, of this holodeck engineer who's killed.
Say a holodeck counterfeiter, right. Well, you can say that. You could also brand it as the ends justify the means.
Right. There's so much there.
And if the both ends of these episodes equals saving billions in a war, that might be. I mean, how many things were, going back to, it's the carbon copy, it's the go-to thing, but how many atrocities were committed in the name of ending the fascist, Axis powers? World War II was a good war, but how many, bad things were committed in the greater good of ending that war? So, which the Dominion War always seems to get compared to, as far as all-out war and good-bad wars.
And I'm going to talk about In the Pale Moonlight more in a moment when we get to the Counselor's Log. Dan has asked a question.
We got to the Counselor's Log yet. Oh, my God. Okay.
Dan asked a question about still wondering how Living Witness applies to this subject. So Living Witness is that Star Trek Voyager episode that I think we mentioned in a previous week, but this is really where, this is the B'Elanna Torres episode, right, Larry?
No, you always do this. You're thinking of Remember.
Gosh.
Where the Remember, and we did mention it before in our Prejudice episode. But
right.
Remember is where
this is the Picardo Doctor
episode. They tried to
episode.
Totally paper over their Holocaust period.
Right. Which relates here, but it's not the episode that has been brought up. Right. Living Witness. Yes. This is the Doctor episode where he wakes up years in the future.
It's a bizarre. It's where a copy of his program had been on a planet, and this is also a little bit of that holodeck within a holodeck, only as a storytelling device, not in reality.
Right.
Because you see a whole culture that had taken this discovery of the Doctor and his entire
but not
program,
that discovery, the other discovery.
Yes, a little D discovery on Voyager. No, the Doctor, his program is discovered and used by one side that in a case a little bit like Remember, where two factions one had been dominant, had been slave master. They dominated the other, and the other side had a permanent, minority underclass, and supposedly legally they were now equal, but there were many, many ways where there was still, second-class citizenship for this entire subspecies group. And they were very sensitive about it, and everything on paper was, oh, no, we're all equal. But in the past, they had used the Voyager interruption, this weird, to explain what happened to some of their leaderships and some of their members that had been martyred. It's almost as if in 1968, whites had been able to blame Martin Luther King's assassination on some alien visitor, once they felt guilty about it. I'd never thought of it that way until just then. But that's what this is about, and it's about the Doctor coming in, and they have museum tours, and they're showing these alien visitors and how they foisted this upon them and how they killed these noble people from and this is what brought us together was we were all being equally attacked. And it's like, no, the Doctor is saying in real life, no, I was there. This is not my people. We would have never have done this. We never would have interfered. And the Doctor keeps digging, and he like Forrest Gega, in Distant Origin, a rogue historian this time, not a scientist, but they're looking and he's going, oh my God, he's right. And then he finds out that his own people basically killed the guy. And even though they've tried to get along for 100 years, the powers that be are like, no, you'll undo all the peace that we've been able to put together. And he's like, no, the truth is what the truth will make us free. And so just about the time you're watching the Doctor battle against this, you jump ahead in time and you see later down the line that same culture has assimilated the truth, including the falsity. You know, the pageant of their history includes the Troubles, the fake explanation, and then the revelation of the. And now they revere the Doctor as the great truth bringer to their civilization, and it has nothing to do with the time flow of real Voyager. It's like the ultimate. It's not even a reset episode. It's like here's this episode over, but it's totally about that. You know. It's even an accidental K3, I could tell you in a little bit, when it's not the real...
Accidental K3. That sounds like that could be your bad name right there, Larry. So with that,
but that's living witness, right. And it has nothing... What's amazing is it has nothing to do with the real... And it's like accidental lost history manipulated. But it's very comical in the way they... To me, it's like when we get dinosaur bones and we try to extrapolate what the dinosaur what the creature looked like, and we have no idea, but we're extrapolating. And part of the early comedy of that episode is the Doctor going, no, like when, and they're showing all these simulations with authority. Here's what they did, and here's what they ate, and here's what they look like. And the Doctor's going, no,
that's not it at all. Yeah,
Then it turned sinister. Yeah.
Well, and we have examples of this. Right before I moved out of New York City last fall, lived there for almost 10 years, and my family, we revisited some of our favorite sites. And one of the places we went to was the Natural History Museum on the Upper West Side, which has dinosaur bones. It also has the famous planetarium, all sorts of stuff. And what was fascinating, there's all these dioramas, right? Or they're not called dioramas. They're like, those big clear windows, and they have set up this like stage from ancient history or like or key moments in history. And they have one that's set up that's always been there, that's about settlers from Europe coming to America and interacting with Native Americans, with American Indians.
Beyond corn and turkey.
Right. And there's this diorama that's set up, and it's always been there, but now they added this all this information on the window that pointed to what's accurate and what's inaccurate about this diorama. And so that is an example of living witness of this museum has for decades said this is the way it was. And now with more inclusivity of voices and of better views of history and kind of cutting through the myth of America and getting to what actually happened, we're finding a more realistic truth about what actually happened in that moment. And I thought that was so fascinating, and it ties back into to living witness here.
Well, and even better, because we're facing this all the time. This is totally about Confederate statues. We're in a place that totally is mindful. It reminds me also there's a Native American museum. There's a quirky little museum built in the 20s and 30s. It's quirkily built in the side of a rock out in the desert, up by Palmdale and Lancaster here. Now it's a state museum, but it was privately run for years. And one of the old days of the like the safari, the adventurers, almost like an Indiana Jones type or whatever. And a guy who was I don't know anything about names, so sorry everybody. But the gist of it is he collected all kinds of natural history objects from rocks and geology to primitive tribes and native tribes and Aboriginal people, not so Aboriginal, but native, but whatever, from around the world, and collect them in a museum and presented them in a way. And 50, 80 years later, 100 years later, any one of those fields would say, oh, like this was groundbreaking. He did tons of work. But the presentation and the filters that they're brought to you in, and a lot of the interpretations have been superseded. They've been updated, it was wrong. And there wasn't anything really intentionally, he wasn't trying to malign. It was his worldview. It was the whole British Empire, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and you see the whole world through that lens when that's not what's going on. Anyway, same thing as your display window. Rather than change that or shut it down, there's all kinds of displays talking. Now they look at it as historical interpretation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which I love, rather than just wipe. So this is all wrong and wiping it away. How much more textured is it to see what was wrong and why, and color our, and then 100 years from now do the same thing again.
It's a really interesting debate that's happening
and
now.
By the way, I'm not by saying all that, I'm not metaphorically saying let's keep all the Confederate statues up.
Yeah.
The whole thing about moving them into museums, rather than having them being out celebrated, putting them in museums where they should belong, just like we shouldn't wipe out all knowledge of Nazi Germany and leave that, which is what happens in a lot of Star Trek episodes. But there's a difference between saving something that's worth saving and something that was not crappy art. As somebody finally started saying, some of these statues are really they are not works of art. It's
this is it's a complicated topic that doesn't have it's one thing that I think about here is what these
and I guess we're saying this because our topic is misinformation and fake news, but as we said, the truth is at the bottom of this, and I guess looking for the truth envelops this as well.
Yeah,
and
it's
Victor's right.
When you look at statues and these and what's seen in museums, it is symbolic, and it is about what we celebrate, what we are choosing to dedicate a monument to. When you visit the Lincoln Memorial, it says in this temple, those are the words inscribed in the Lincoln Monument. These are things that our culture is saying, this is important, we need to celebrate this, or we need to honor it, or we need to remember it in some way. So who are these people that we are celebrating and remembering and honoring? And as culture changes and as our view becomes more, hopefully, accurate, all of that stuff needs to be updated, and all of that stuff needs to be changed. I think this might have changed, or it's about to change, but there's no women. There's no monuments to women in Central Park. It's all men. And there's been a movement now to change that very recently. But there's so many aspects of this that we're revisiting that need to be revisited, and we could talk much more about.
Let's just invent a topic for this.
Yeah. With that, Larry. Actually, before we go into the counselor's log, one thing I gotta address in the comments. A lot of people are talking about Spock, and
I saw this. Like Cairo on Twitch.
Yeah,
I'll never forgive the writers of Spock having the writers have Spock be the one that tells Starfleet to hide the truth about Discovery. And my first reaction to that is, really? This is the Spock and Vulcans who never told Starfleet about Amok Time, about Plaque-Tau and the blood fever and all of that?
Spock is all about exaggeration. Lie, Spock? An exaggeration. About neglecting. Look, we didn't find out that Spock had a brother until Star Trek V. Everyone forgets that. And when they find out he has a brother, everyone's like, Spock, you got a brother? And he's like, yeah, well, I guess I never mentioned it, did I?
This is why all the hoo-ha about Michael Burnham being his foster sister, not even his half brother. I'm like, okay, and now there's a whole the writers retconned a reason that she's in this top secret file. But I never had a problem with that. The Cybok is out there. The Pain was made in 1989 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
We've been there. But I still go back to the fact that Vulcans had been co-federation founders with humans for 100 years. They had been known allies, the first contact, and they never, in 200 years, no human knew about Vulcan reproduction until McCoy stumbles into it firsthand. I think the Enterprise tried to retcon that around the edges a little bit, but yeah. So don't talk to me about the Vulcans being, this lily white, or excuse me, this this puritanical bastion of truth. They've been led astray and indulged.
Yeah, the Tellarites will tell you exactly how it is. They are honest to a fault. And I see Vulcans on the other end of that spectrum, that they are highly careful of what they reveal. And even when they reveal something, they haven't quite revealed everything about it. And Spock does that throughout the franchise, in all universes. It's like in the Kelvin timeline and the Prime timeline. It's we could go around and around about that. So with that, Larry, it's been a while. Let's jump into the counselor's log.
We're losing a few people to one of the GalaxyCon is having one of their great live virtual panels right now. So I think we've lost a few people to that. But we plod on here. We were here first.
We will boldly go, keep on going here. So there's the counselor's log. This is where I attempt to explain the science behind some of what we're experiencing in this episode. And this was a big challenge for me, Larry, because there's a lot. There's a lot that relates to misinformation and fake news. And some of this is based on older research before social media. Some of this is based on newer research, but it's quite difficult to try to distill everything into a short bit. But there's a few things that I think people really need to know. And one is there's a recent study that was published in Science, very big scientific journal, Science. This was in 2018, that showed that fake news actually reaches more people and it spreads more quickly than the truth. And I think there's something revealing there about how fake news is intentionally designed to be contagious. And it's in the way that it is contagious.
Viral, you might say.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah. It's in the way that it goes viral also has big clues into why it impacts us so much. And depending on where you're in the world, when we say fake news and misinformation and propaganda, it probably brings up some political ideas of who are the bad culprits here. But there's nothing unique to being on the conservative end of the spectrum or liberal end of the spectrum that makes you more or less vulnerable to fake news. Everyone is vulnerable to it. And there was a great a meta-analysis. That means a study of studies that put together over 50 studies and look to see what are the common threads here. And what they found there is both liberals and conservatives were both likely to be vulnerable to fake news when it's targeting them. So it's not, and we see examples of that. Not only on the political end, a lot of criticism has been pointed, rightfully so, at the Trump administration. But on the liberal end, and we've talked about climate change and denying climate change, which is definitely liberals in America are much more aligned with climate science, and conservatives in America are much more aligned against it or denying it. There's also things that liberals are guilty of that less so on the conservative end. So vaccine denying, a lot of Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop company, and all of this like organic, natural solutions. Liberal people are the ones who are more vulnerable to those ideas of getting these pure substances that are unadulterated. So this happens across. Everyone is vulnerable to it. So the question then becomes why and how and all of that. So a few things here. I'm going to start with In the Pale Moonlight. In the Pale Moonlight shows our mind's immune system at work. Just like we have an immune system that fights off viruses, our mind has an immune system that fights off dangerous ideas. and it does this automatically without even thinking about it.
Self-protection system, supposedly?
It's a self-protection system. Yeah, you might think about it as rationalization, but we want to be consistent. We want our actions to be consistent with our beliefs, and when there's a mismatch, we either change our beliefs or we rationalize our behavior, or maybe we might change our behavior. But this is what we see Sisko do in The Pale Moonlight, which is why I wanted to talk about that as it relates to the first duty, is he rationalizes. We see it happen in his personal log as he's talking to us, that he's finding a reason why he's doing what he's doing. He's It's the ends justify the means, right? Mm-hmm. And we all do it. There's a great example of this in psychology for those who are interested. Leon Fessinger was a psychologist, a social psychologist.
I just made that up.
No,
Leon Fessinger was the studio executive in charge of Looney Tunes at Warner Brothers. Oh, wait, that's Leon Schlesinger. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Fake news, Larry. Don't give us any of that fake news. So he was a social psychologist in the 1950s who discovered this cult who believed that aliens were going to destroy the world on December 21st, 1954. And so he infiltrated this cult to see what would happen on December 21st, 1954. And people who were a part of this cult, they believe that if they let go of all the belongings and come here, that the aliens will save them, and as the rest of the Earth is destroyed. Well, the Earth wasn't destroyed, and at first people started to believe that they saved Earth, that their prayers were answered. Some believe that this destruction was delayed to Christmas Day, and this is all documented in a book called When Prophecy Fails. It's one of my favorite stories in psychology because it shows this immune system at work. That yes, we have a comment here, cognitive dissonance. This is where cognitive dissonance theory came into play, that when we do something or when we believe something that conflicts with each other, for example, I have given up all my possessions, I've come to this cult, the world is going to be destroyed, but then it's not destroyed, that creates dissonance. We try to resolve that dissonance by changing our beliefs or changing our behaviors. And here, they change the beliefs that, we actually saved Earth. Sisko changes his beliefs. I'm not really doing a bad thing, I'm doing a good thing, because this is going to save the Federation. Mm-hmm. So that's number one.
As opposed to, say, an android that just smoke pours out of his head and he melts down because he can't bridge the gap.
Yes, and
he pulls a Norman and he pulls a.
Jared says you talked about this on the Psych Show. Yes, Jared, thank you for that's an old reference to an old Psych Show episode.
You've got viewers on your channel.
I've got viewers. That's always awesome to see. So that's part one. Is we want to be consistent and we have this immune system, and then when we get new information, it's not all treated equally. And there's a line of research that leads to motivated reasoning. This is the idea that information is not neutral. And sometimes new information might lead us to gain things, or it might lead us to lose things. This is Star Trek Voyager Distant Origin, is when you get this new information, are you motivated to accept it, or are you motivated to reject it? And if you're in power, if you're in political power, or if you have a lot invested in a belief system, and this new information really conflicts with that, you might be motivated to completely reject it and find a reason why it might not be true.
Or to swallow it and carry the burden of knowing that because it's ensuring your power. That's your power.
Yes.
It's sad when truth is a threat to one's power, because that's kind of revealing. I think there's a point where you go down that road. At one point, if you would just embrace the truth, this is like Watergate was the cover-up was worse than the original crime.
Yeah.
For one example. But there's a pivot point where if you just take that challenging truth and embrace it, and prepare everybody and do that. But if you don't, if you let that be a rock in your shoe that builds up and builds up and builds up, you make it whatever the outcome is. And after a while, you've spun this this tapestry of fake threads that's all going to fall apart eventually, and it'll take you down with it. But that's what people play that game on whatever level.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the other parts of this that I want to get into are much more related to what's happening in the world right now and changes as a result of social media, of YouTube. I feel
like all this is happening in the world right now.
Well, those theories have been around for a long time. But these some newer ideas gets to. Remember how we were talking about how viral this stuff can be, Larry? Well, one of the things that makes fake news and misinformation so viral is how emotional it is. And the quickest...
this whole thing about how fast things going viral, it used to just be the luck of the draw, but now algorithms that are designed to sell products, Facebook and Google, are also what's weaponizable in the arena of ideas.
Well, and sometimes the product is the idea. Sometimes the product...
Right, but I mean, it's made to sell, whether it's something in a box or it's an idea that someone's going to manipulate you with. If it comes pre-assembled with all the buttons, knowing what buttons to push in each individual viewer, that's like more weaponized than taking atomic power and making bombs out of it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You're right. And the quickest way to emotionally activate someone is to threaten their identity or to threaten their status, to threaten their power. The quickest way to get someone to shake out of their status quo is to piss them off and make them afraid that they're losing power. The fastest way, Larry, to get the easiest way to get people to vote, it's not hope or inspiration. The easiest way to mobilize a voter base is outrage, and especially outrage related to their identity. This is it. This is the quickest way to do it. So a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news, what it does so scientifically well, like it's engineered for this, to target certain identities, to make them pissed off or to make them scared that they're losing their status. And when that happens, you do not think clearly. Mm-hmm. And there's new research that shows when people are vulnerable to fake news, they aren't thinking clearly. Right. They're not rationally thinking. Yeah, right. They're very emotional, and it's not. I'm not saying that these people people who are vulnerable to fake news are they're bad thinkers. It's more fake news is engineered to make you emotional, and when you are emotional, you don't think clearly. I'm sure I have shared things on social media that were fake, but I didn't realize it because I saw it. I got so emotionally overwhelmed, and I just shared it. This is the key here, and the second part to this is something you mentioned, Larry, is algorithms are now very good at giving you content that's going to resonate with you. And the more emotional it is, the more sensational it is, the more it threatens your identity, the more likely you are to share it. And that's where the biggest danger comes in, Larry, because when you see other people sharing it, it's communicating, hey, I believe this thing. And when you see it going viral and the number of shares, well, that must mean that this has some kind of merit because all of these people believe it. Right. We're not internal scientists. We have internal lawyers, and we're highly influenced by what our friends and family think. How about the people that we love and trust? So when everyone is sharing this,
people that we don't know, and that's where likes and views come in.
Yeah, This is why this is such a massive challenge. There's so many different pieces to this. There's so many different pieces at play. And
this is again a new technology. My parallel to this, I keep going back to atomic energy, and my first favorite documentary of all time is one called The Atomic Cafe, and it's hard to find. But the whole thing is it's both comical and scary and bittersweet, but it's everything. It's the science and the pop culture and the cultural and the psychology, sociology around the coming of the A-bomb.
Yeah.
And it starts with the science and it goes up through the 50s and 60s, everything from like pop culture songs and references and movies and goofy things to really scary political, and all that. But it really hits me how it's a wave, and we have to assimilate. But it's like any major social upheaval, just like 9/11, which was a culture shock to people. It's like any new shock to the system, and I'm thinking here in terms of like a technical science shock more than like a military attack kind of thing. But they're all the same. There's like a wave. It's almost, what is it about the 5 stages of grief, or the five,
right.
The 5 stages of whatever, fill in the blank. It's like the 5 stages, and part of it is if it's not fear, it's kind of like wonderment and make fun of it, and then but eventually the repercussions settle in, and then you get the allegorical sci-fi movies about it or whatever. And we went through that with the A-bomb, and it's like Facebook started off being, and Twitter started off being, how we reconnect with grandma, or how we find all the members of our high school class for a reunion or something.
Yeah.
And it's only been, and it's like, guys, it's only been around 10, 12, 15 years. We're only just now seeing the fruits of either what somebody had in mind all along, or what somebody a few years in realized, I can take this and weaponize it,
There's a few ways.
And we're just now becoming aware on a mass scale. The people that were devious up front were only just now. It's okay, but to me, it's like, yes, we're only just now. This is like such a new facet of culture that hit its face for a long time. We're just finding that same hatchet that cuts down a tree could go.
The way I think about it, Larry, is I think we've invented the automobile, but we haven't invented the seatbelt yet, or airbags, or all of these, or
the battery that's going to prevent it from global warming us.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I live in Silicon Valley. I work for a tech company now, a mental health startup, and I live in this world, and I can tell you that it is the least regulated industry in the United States. Tech is not regulated by any means, because it's so new, and our leaders, our elected officials, are largely ignorant of how it works. They do not have an understanding of this. And this is something that really opened my eyes to how these algorithms work. I know a lot about how the YouTube algorithm works based on creating videos for it. But if you look at Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, when you share a tweet, when you share a status update, when you post an image on Instagram, it's not shared to everyone who follows you. It's shared with one small sample. And then all of these platforms look to see, how well is this post resonating with this small sample? If it's resonating well, then it's shared with a larger audience. If it's resonating well there, then it's shared with an even larger audience, and then an even larger audience. This is why you might post something and not everyone sees it. And so what does resonate? Really emotional, surprising content. And that's also the stuff that sticks out in our memory. And some people have weaponized this for the purposes of fake news, for the purposes of misdirection. There's a couple of things in the comments section that I think are really relevant here.
A lot of good stuff.
There's a lot. Jared mentions...
And some new I want to tell everybody in the comments real quick that I see a lot of new names, which is awesome. And a lot of people still on YouTube. Just knowing that the chat is mainly happening on Facebook. But just want everybody to know we're seeing you. And it's great to see all these new names. Hopefully we can do some shout-outs. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
I want to talk about Jared's comment. The loss of status psychological effects can be currently seen in law enforcement agencies across the country right now. This ties into our conversation on prejudice and racism, Larry. And I think, Jared, that's a really interesting observation, is for a very long time, police in the United States, among many communities, have had this high position of power. And now there is a lot that's being looked at like, how did these law enforcement agencies originate? What are their biases? What are their motivations? And maybe we should reevaluate our whole relationship with the police. And I think that some of the response that we've seen from police in some places has been very supportive, in some places has been highly concerning. So I think that's a great comment. Cairo also says that sometimes the truth is in the eye of the beholder as well. And this reminds me of something that really resonated with me.
It's a 2-time Star Trek episode title, so yes, obviously.
That's right. I heard this from one of the researchers who looks at fake news, and I'm blanking on her name now, but she said, just because it's your truth doesn't make it the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Stephen Colbert has.
You're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own. You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Yeah, and this gets to the idea of truthiness, which is something Stephen Colbert coined, is the feeling of something being true, that you feel it in your gut. And that's one of the dangers here, is as we all start to question what are facts, we kind of rely on our feelings, which is not really a good place for us to be as a culture. So, Larry, there's a lot more we could get into. I think we need a little bit of a palate cleanser here. I think we need a little K3 factor. So let's warp forward to K3. We're going to talk about this a lot more as we get to the away mission here, folks. But let's talk about K3. So, this is, Larry, where you do a deep dive into a connection with the original series.
Yeah. Well, you always say that. It could be any series. I just call it K3 because I love how the only reference to mental health, really, aside from the experimental machines that are always bad at all Starfleet facilities, was the K3 indicated on McCoy's biomonitor there, which wasn't even called a biomonitor. It says brain K3 over there on the second one. No, yeah, it's one more chance to connect a deep dive into Star Trek with our topic today. And the minute we got to the first duty, it really resonated with me. There's a story I will always remember in the days when I would talk to everybody at the end of each season. And so, Ron Moore, the great Ron D. Moore, is credited with writing the first duty. And this was back when, Ron and all the boys, as Jerry Taylor called them, they were all, Ron and Renee and Narain Shankar, they were all in Brannon, were all in their mid-late 20s. And she was kind of like the mom to these young boy writers. And Michael was kind of the uncle. But Ron told me, and Michael backed this up, that when they wrote the story, it was pretty easy to write. This whole dilemma here we're talking about, in Wesley standing up to his cadet friends in their conspiracy, and Picard not wanting to call him a liar, but looking at him and saying, we've got the fact, we've got the scientific evidence, we've got scans, we've recreated it. We know you guys were really flying the dangerous maneuver when your fellow cadet was killed. They're all trying to say, no, it was just a horrible accident. And he lays down the law about the truth and lays the guilt trip on him, and Wesley finally... But as they wrote that episode, Ron, who was in his mid-20s, was all about, no, this is not believable. Wesley would never turn on his friends. Because when you're that age, your friends are everything. And Michael Piller was saying, no, Ron, Picard is right. This is Wesley growing up. And damn it, Wesley is young Gene Roddenberry. He was named Wesley Crusher for Eugene Wesley Roddenberry. It was Gene's embodiment of himself. It was all the growing pains of all the, not Wesley as a character or Will Wheaton's portrayal, but all the stupid writers who couldn't write Wesley correctly in the early years. This is post, right? Wesley's out of the regular cast, and we're these guest spots where he's into now. And they're doing a much better job of writing Wesley the older he got and the better the writers got.
Yeah.
And probably the younger the writers got, too. But there was a huge debate between Ron, the up-and-coming, boy wonder writer. Oh, Ron writes all the family stories, and Ron writes all the Klingon stories, and he's the great up-and-coming writer. But his dad...
Who came in through a spec script, we should mention that, was very young and came in as an outsider. His name is so synonymous with some of the greatest Star Trek episodes, but he came in as an outsider to the writer's room. Right.
The bonding about Worf and the orphan boy was a total spec script. It was he and Renee Ashford, the only two that did spec scripts that were basically filmed as was, and they were on staff. But he and Michael Piller had this head-banging. Michael said, no, ultimate Star Trek has to be about the truth. And Ron said, no, the truth is that Wesley would never betray his friends, because if he did, he would not have friends. And, of course, the episode ends with, they ultimately came to Wesley telling the truth and suffering some penalty. But more than the rest of his cadet corps, he's been sanctioned, and he is worried about losing face with cadets. But he's ultimately convinced he's made the right choice, or Picard's trying to help him make. Anyway, by the time I talked to Ron, like a year or two later, and maybe he'd been through the ringer about responsibility, and maybe he'd had a kid by then, thinking, you know what, Michael was right. We can't have a Star Trek regular character, especially the one named for Gene Roddenberry. We can't have a Star Trek character not come down on the side of truth. Yeah. Like, we can't have that. So that was a case of something that falls into a lot of our debates and arguments and is like this, the whole okay boomer, oh, you're just a millennial or a Gen. No, stupid, I'm a Gen. Old man, I'm a Gen Zer, not a millennial. Get your terms right. I mean, sometimes we get into a little bit of a generational divide, and I try to bridge that. But really, sometimes it is about the okay boomers are too into their ruts or their blinders, and that's a commodity, that's a cost. But also sometimes younger people, for all the energy that sometimes it needs to knock the rust off of things and shake things up and move things along, sometimes they can suffer from just a lack of life experience too. So, we want the best of all worlds. But anyway, this whole thing about the truth, I always go back in that episode, and I always think of the meta level to that episode was the great Ron Michael debate about, what the truth really should be for Wesley. And ultimately, even Ron putting a few more years on his experience and going, yeah, wait, that was the right thing to do. Which is I always love that story.
I didn't know. I didn't know that there was this backstory. There was this debate going on about that episode. Part of it is Wesley does feel like such a narc there, that he is ratting out his friends, and that when I first saw this episode when I was much younger, that part of it stuck out to me. When I was older and I watched that episode, Picard's monologue is what sticks out to me. So I think part of it is age and how we see it.
Dad, 2-year-old.
Yeah, right. Now that I'm a dad, part of it is age. But even when I was a kid, when Wesley does face the consequences, what I liked about it is he knows he's going to lose friends. He knows that this is going to have an impact on his career, and he still does it. Like, I thought that really shows someone who is of deep integrity, that he is he's saying no to all of these things. And it also shows the power of having a really positive adult figure in your life. Many weeks ago, we talked about resilience, this idea when you're going through a big struggle or a trauma. Resilience is about the ability to get back to how you were functioning before. And one of the variables that's been shown to be super related to resilience is having a positive relationship with an adult who's not a family member. This means someone who's not mom or dad. Now, Wesley, unfortunately, doesn't have a father in his life, but he does have Jean-Luc Picard, who is this mentor-teacher figure. And he comes in that moment and says, look, kid, you cannot compromise on your values here. And if you do this, you're going to keep compromising on this over and over and over again in your life. And there's actually research to support that too. When you compromise on your values, it becomes easier to compromise on your values. That's one of those no SHIT results in psychology. It's like, well, yeah, that makes total sense, which I think is half of all of psychology, is like it feels like it's common sense. And the other half doesn't feel like common sense, but then when you think it through, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's one of the things I hate about psychology is people are always like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Well, define common sense, Dr. Ali.
Well, yeah, I mean, it like intuitively makes sense in your mind, which gets back to everything we're talking about, right? And around we go. But I love that background here. I love that background, Larry. It's very.
Well, you're very welcome, Ali. Yeah. And I just here's a chance to say, if people love that kind of deep diving in Trek, That's what we do. Everything in Trekland, that's what I try to do, but especially with Portal 47. And I just want to say real quick that if people are enjoying that kind of thing, I've got a slide, and I've even got an offer that matches the slide if everybody wants to go right now in Corona time at LarryNemecek.com/simple342. I've got by short time, Corona time, everything seems like we don't know what's coming down the pike, and nobody wants to commit long. A lot of people don't want to commit long, so if you want to jump over, that's my livelihood now, or one of my livelihood. And I'm not doing tours. We're still not running around doing open tours yet. So not doing live shows. I can't talk to everybody live. So thank God we have our virtual platform here. But we've been Portal 47. We were Zooming, or actually free conference calling for 5 years. So this whole world that everybody's got used to, we've been using that to get together and have Trek connection, and also bring a lot of voices in. Backstage Trek, that people, to give them a whole new deep. I say it's for Portal 47's for all the Trek fans who have no idea how much Star Trek they have no idea about.
I like that diet.
Like Ron and Mike. And I should say this too. When I characterize that as Ron and Michael headbanging over it, that's the creative process. It's not like they were catastrophically torn asunder, like we think about some of our political debates now. The sign of a great, healthy writer's room is having the free, any creative place like that, and especially in a writer's room on a show. If it's shut down or very patriarchal, something's going to happen. Like, I don't know, somebody be fired. Sometimes it's the people in charge getting fired or being
a good writer's room should function like a good senior staff in Star Trek, where debate. Dissenting point of views is encouraged. It's worked out. Everyone's say is equal. That should be the best writers.
To a point. I mean, someone ultimately has the ultimate responsibility.
Yeah, the captain or the
table, the head writer, showrunner, whoever it is. But up until that point, let's have a different, because we'll all be stronger for all the diversity of opinion that gets factored in.
Yeah.
So,
it all gets back to IDIC, Larry. It all
IDIC.
gets back to IDIC. And with IDIC, let's head into the away mission. So
we have covered so much.
We have covered so much, and there's still so much more to cover. The away mission, this is the part of the show where I give you some way to apply everything we've talked about to your own life, to help you work on your mental health.
Obi Ali, you're our only hope.
Oh my gosh! Don't cross those streams, Larry. Don't cross those streams. But if you do want to cross them, I'm happy to be associated with Obi-Wan, the key character of the prequel series. I will always make that argument. The prequels are really about Obi-Wan. They're not about Anakin Skywalker. Anyways, that's a different franchise. And I think that was also another bad impression. So for those of you keeping score, there's another one. You are welcome, everyone. So, Larry, this was really hard. How do I distill down advice about dealing with
want to go back to music? Is that what you want? You want to go back to
yeah, just listen to the Wrath of Khan score. There's your away mission. Oh, Dan says the truth is out there. How's that for crossing the streams?
There you go.
Love it. I never really watched X-Files. Like, I watched episodes here and there, but it always I found it a little scary for 1990s Ali Mattu. I was a little scared by it, but I should probably... But I can't do an impression because that line is in the title, but I can do... There you go. Not an impression. There you go, Larry. Now we're in business. We are.
But now you're a dad, and nothing scares you.
Yeah, so, that's right. Yeah. Except my daughter. That's what scares me. So, away mission. Let's talk about that. Okay, so what works in terms of navigating fake news and misinformation? We're not entirely sure because the technology behind it keeps changing and it keeps evolving. There's some research that suggests labeling it and identifying it is helpful in reducing its transmission, reducing how viral it is, but some research doesn't support that. And we're seeing now that Twitter, especially as a platform, is taking that on. Facebook has kind of said, well, we're not going to be arbiters of truth, but Facebook or Twitter is going in that direction more. So we'll see. That's an ongoing experiment. But to relate this to, and there's a lot more that has to be done with changing our larger systems, not only the way our politics works here in the United States, but also how media works. Ezra Klein, and if you're interested in this topic, Ezra Klein's Why We're Polarized is a really great read that dives into the history of this and how it relates to politics and media. He's one of the co-founders of Vox Media, so if you're interested in their platform, Ezra Klein's book is really great. But he has this quotation I really like, which is, the political media is biased, but not towards the right or left so much as towards the loud, outrageous, colorful, inspirational, confrontational. It is biased towards the political stories and figures who activate our identities, because it is biased towards and dependent on the fraction of the country with the most intense political identities. So there's a lot we have to do with our political institutions and media institutions. I don't want to talk about that because Life Support Live is about you. It's about what you can do right now. So what can you do? Well, number one, and this is a real tricky one, Larry, because I have spent about 25, probably close to 25 years of my life really identifying this identity as a geek, as a Trekkie, as someone who loves science fiction. And one of the key recommendations here is keeping your identity small. So keeping the things that you find are core to you, keeping them as small as possible. Because as we mentioned before, when your identity is attacked, that's when it's so easy for you to get emotional, to not think clearly, and be so vulnerable to this stuff. So number one is, how can you keep your identity small? This gets back to gatekeeping, something we talked about before, is... if you keep your identity small as a Star Trek fan, you're a bit more open to new reinventions of Star Trek. But if your identity is really tied to very specific parts of Star Trek, and you see those parts as being challenged in new incarnations, it's easy to get outraged and all of this stuff. So easier said than done, I know, about keeping your identity small. So I know, let's just pretend you can't do that, because that's a very hard thing to do. Well, here's my very specific tip that I think everyone can do. When you come across some form of media and you find it really activating you, making you mad, making you sad, making you defensive, all of that sort of stuff, pause and think, is this targeting my identity in some way? Am I feeling outrage? Is this something that is engineered to attack my identity? And take a very, very big pause before you share it. Because the moment you share it, you're communicating to all your friends and family, the people who follow you, that this is true and I believe it, and you're making it more viral, you're co-signing this. Someone in the comments mentioned, I just don't share any political meme or anything like that because it's engineered to persuade, to misinform, for a political purpose. So be very, very careful before you share something, and try to understand, is it targeting your identity, and why is it making you so upset? There's a lot more we can talk about, like those in the science world need to become better storytellers. I have my Story Collider mug. It's an organization I do a lot of work with, which is dedicated to helping people to tell true stories about science. There's a lot that needs to happen to improve science communication, because science just doesn't have as good stories right now as conspiracy theories. Because science, the story it never ends. But we do need to help people in the science world get better at telling the stories that they have experienced. So there's a lot there. I wish I could get into more details, but I would say...
People have lost track of... There's a whole misinformation about a lay audience. They've lost track of what... When we talk about laws and theories, in science, people totally misapply what those even mean. And they, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's such a basic, we've drifted. I go back to we all love the space program and the Right Stuff days of NASA, and it seemed like everybody was there. There's been science, manipulated. We ate plastic and put it in the oceans and in the atmosphere for 2 or 3 generations there. And so there's some kind of, industrialized science that was made for profiteering. People have mistrusted that a little bit, or it's led to that fog of, truth, who's got truth. But pure applied science, when you go back and realize that it's when you get to peer-reviewed journals, and it's not just someone's opinion, it's not even just somebody's, you think you've got hard data, let's review your hard data. That whole thing gets lost sometimes. People think, these scientists are all conspiring against us. Well, they've all cross-checked each other, and there's... I once knew, I had a journalism colleague, and she, for a time, was married to a hail researcher. And so, the leading weather school in the country is the University of Oklahoma, their meteorology school. And that's why the Severe Storms Lab, it has a fancier name now. Anyway, it's like, you talk about a niche. At the time, this was like, the 80s, 90s. There were like, 6 or 8 hail researchers in the country, okay? It's adjacent science to you, I know, but you can appreciate that. So he had this radical theory about hail formation, and he was the outlier. And so it's like the rest of his little tiny circle of 8 or 10 guys all were on a standardized theory, but he was like the radical. But he wasn't ostracized. He still published his data, and he didn't. But I just always remember thinking, okay, here in this tiny, tiny circle of people with this interest, and there's a radical even in this tiny circle. But that to me is like what peer review and science investigation is about. It's
it's important to...
It's what CSI was about. It's why Narain Shankar went from being the science advisor on Star Trek to running a police procedural for years. They would say, we're going to take this case where the science leads us. Like, we're not going to get involved in the emotion of the people or the politics or who's covering up. Go where the science goes.
The thing about science, too, is it doesn't always get it right. And 50 years from now, we're going to know that a lot of what we thought we knew was not true. There's this story in psychology of Kitty Genevieve, this woman who was being attacked in New York City, and all these people were made aware that she's being attacked, and no one called, no one helped. Right? This led to a wide variety of research around bystander apathy, that when there's a lot of people around someone who needs help, there's a diffusion of responsibility and people aren't likely to help. Whereas when there's one person around, you're more likely to help because you feel more responsibility. Here's the thing, Larry. Recent research has shown that the Kitty Genevieve event never really happened the way everyone says it happened. But the research that came out of it is still true. So this is wild. This is a whole field in social psychology research is based on an event that never really happened, and yet it's still true. And there's other research, like
Wait. The initial event of the woman being ignored while being attacked, that was completely... Was it made up by people doing research?
It became this myth through the newspapers and reports that it never really happened that way, but that led people to investigate this phenomenon, and that phenomenon is true, even though the original event is not true, and yet it's still told in introductory psychology classes as if it's true because it is such a powerful story. And then we have things like scientific racism, this phenomenon in the 1800s, 1900s, to rationalize why white people have bigger, better, more complex brains. And it was really a rationalization and a justification for slavery. And those ideas led to ideas of eugenics, which led to not just Khan, Noonien Singh, but it also led to forced sterilizations, sterilizing, quote, feeble-minded people.
You were telling me about this.
We were talking about this, yeah. The state of California has forced sterilized more people than any other state in the country, and this was still legal up until I think 2014. That there's a history of often minority people who would go in to get an appendix out, and the doctors would see this person as being feeble-minded, and they would force sterilize them because we don't want more people like this in the gene pool, and they would never even inform the people.
They're doing a social good here.
They're doing a social good, yeah. So science gets it wrong. We saw that with lobotomies as well. Is people who had schizophrenia, well, let's lobotomize them. They seem to be doing a lot better after that lobotomy. Well, they're doing a lot better because you have completely wiped out their higher order functions of the brain. So science doesn't always get it wrong, or science doesn't always get it right. So it's a very complicated issue. There's a couple of things.
Don't always get it wrong either, but no one cares about that end of
it. Right. Libby mentioned we should fact check. We should fact check everything. And the other thing, I think Libby mentioned it as well, is no, this was Linda who said don't read the comments. So fact checking is right. We should do that.
The comments.
Yeah. Don't read the comments on a blog post or maybe a YouTube video. Okay. Well, so I want to dive into this.
I always, if you, in line with what you said a while ago about if you feel your blood rising, take a breath.
Yes.
If I actually am, and that usually happens in Facebook, not so much on Twitter, but maybe it's more curated. But if that actually happens in Facebook and I'm out in a broader place somewhere where it's not curated, before I will start, it's still new, but since 2016, amazingly, all this awareness and study about look at bots and trolls and completely fake accounts, or look at people being paid to rile you up. I just go back and look at the account. Has it been there for 10 years and there's 5 photos?
Right.
Does this person only post about some political issue and they never post about their kids singing at the Christmas concert or at the 4th of July celebration?
Are they a real person?
Are they a real person? They're deep faking so many profiles. Is there like this weird, are all 7 pictures of the person in the thing, no 2 of them are really the same person?
Right.
There are signs, and it doesn't take long. The thing that sounds exhausting is like Libby said, check your sources. I'm just talking about look at the account of the person that you're about to go post over. Yeah. And if it takes 5-10 seconds, you can click on it, go look. 5-10 seconds will tell you. If you're look at their posts, look at their numbers, look at their photos, and you can pretty much tell if their friends' names, if they even have any friends, if their friends' names are all these kind of weird things, and there's somebody in Peru that knows somebody in Germany that knows somebody in the Yukon, and they know somebody in Pretoria, and you're like, well, they're very global. Or is it just a sloppy troll account? Anyway, that's what I'm saying. It sounds exhausting to say check your sources, but I've found you can take 5-10 seconds. If it's really important, take 5-10 seconds before
and I think that's a big thing we're coming to here is if you are riled up, you need to press the brake. In the old days, we used to say you need to pump the brakes, but now everyone has anti-lock cars. We don't pump brakes anymore. But you need to press the brakes here because the
You're
thing
like
that might be
when you talk about not pumping the brakes.
the thing to know is what's making you upset. It might have been designed to do that. There's evidence in 2016 that in the United States, we were being manipulated by Russian agents who were creating fake Black Lives Matter protests while they were also simultaneously creating fake All Lives Matter protests and having people show up in the same place. So we need to be very careful of who are these sources. And that's a skill that I think is very underdeveloped for a lot of us, is digitally how to do it. Larry, you just mentioned a really great tip here about how to do that quickly.
Well, again, it's taking advantage of it being new, and we haven't adapted to it. It's so amplified, weaponized speed of light.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an old quote that I was going to mention a while ago. We were talking about truth and lies, and it's attributed to Mark Twain, which is how old it is. But it's like a lie is halfway around the world before the truth puts its shoes on them.
Yep. And that is, even faster now. That goes at Q speed, whoosh,
And what I love is I always thought that was a Mark Twain quote, and I was reading about it, and apparently it's not really a Mark Twain quote. So there's
there you go.
I don't know who said it, but it's not Mark Twain.
So this comment that Linda mentioned about don't read the comments, I want to just mention that one of my favorite terms in psychology is called the nasty effect, and it's what can happen when you read a comment section. So comment sections, if they are unregulated, can really go into polarized directions, and the nasty effect happens in these unregulated comment sections. I think, Larry, the comment section here, they're largely coming from Trekland. These are people that this is curated. This is a community, right?
Yeah.
That's different. And I try to do that on the Psych Show as well, on my YouTube channel, if you're interested.
As opposed to these wild people coming in from your YouTube community.
Yeah, it's, you have to, you're coming to our community, our home, and it is our job to make this a welcoming experience. And if you're gonna attack someone who's here at our party, we're gonna block you. We're gonna get rid of you, because this is a welcoming place that celebrates IDIC, right? But in those unregulated comment section, when you see these polarizing comments, that's when the nasty effect kicks in. And so what that means is people who go into an unregulated polarized comment section, seeing those comments, it further digs in your heels on whatever side of this argument that you are. So if you go into this article not believing it, and you see comments that are really polarizing, you will further not believe it. You'll become even more polarized. Or if you really believe it and you see polarized comments, you'll believe it even more. So this is a very, very precarious situation that we're navigating, a very difficult one. I think one thing that we can all take away. I think
we've made great strides since 2016. I think this thing all kind of blows up. And real quick, I love that one of my Tuesday lives, 1 o'clock Pacific, everybody, on my Facebook page, one of my Trekland Tuesdays lives a year or two ago, I was so thrilled. Somebody actually tried to do a parametered study on bots and trolls and tweets and try to get some numbers to it. And I hope that's an emerging field. But it was like, look, here's some numbers instead of being overwhelmed by social media. But it's just been the last 3-4 years since the whole Russian thing in the election in 2016 that we've even been aware of this. So on one hand, it feels we're all exhausted and beat down, which is kind of that's the whole point of it. But we're just now turning this ship around to be aware, much less what are the solutions. So I'm sorry, go ahead, give us more solutions.
I mean, that's kind of what I've got, Larry. That's okay. I wish there was more easy answers here. And one of the things that we haven't really gotten into, because I don't think there are any clear answers, is people who might be deeply into conspiracy theories and communities. We haven't really talked about how some of these conspiracy theories and communities can really give people an identity and can give people connection. We're so wired for connection, and if we don't have that in people, we might get that from substances, we might get that from media, we might also get that from very fringe areas. For the same reasons why, we don't hear about ISIS very much anymore, but ISIS was able to recruit people who are very alienated and alone, which is much the same way that the alt-right, the KKK, neo-Nazis also recruit people as people who are very much alienated and alone. So a lot of this gets back to connection. How can we have connection with each other so that those who are most vulnerable, most struggling, most alone do not get connection with areas of our culture that might lead to a very scary place. We don't have the best answers for that right now. This is a complicated issue. Larry, I think
it feels like the acceleration of life. Like every generation says, "Oh my God, everything moves faster than it used to," and that happens. That's just civilization, culture. But with technology and with the digital, and the whole world is in my hand, and I can be swayed or I can just be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Or I can be overwhelmed by being swayed. It's like adapting to that new plateau. It's like they keep moving the accelerator floor below where you can keep pressing the gas fast.
So
anyway.
we are well overdue to open those hailing frequencies. They've been open. We've been talking, and we're also over on time. So let's maybe round about some of our favorite comments. And by the way, folks, if you really enjoyed any of the psychology bits and pieces that I've been talking about, do me a favor and subscribe to The Psych Show on YouTube. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Mattu. I talk about this stuff a lot more in depth right over there. Thank you, Jared, for being part of the psyche community over there and referencing some of those episodes. So I'd love to keep talking to you about the psych stuff over there. Larry, you got some comments you want to make sure we get to?
They're all been. I have been. I just want to thank everybody for the comments, and I want to say too that Ali's been working on his YouTube channel. I haven't used it until just the last few months. So please, everybody, if you're of a mind, go over to mine. It's just Larry Nemecek on YouTube, and my Tuesday show is also there. My Tuesday Live, where I talk about a Star Trek topic. Hopefully, it's not the same old. I always try to not pile on, but take a big picture, safe and sane look at Star Trek and something going on. But that's Tuesdays, and that's on my channel. I'd love it if you'd subscribe and join over there too. A lot of you are at Facebook, and my Twitter is at Larry Nemecek, and Instagram is Larry Nemecek's Trekland, the same as it is Facebook if you're watching us on Facebook. But a lot of these names are in here. Ashton Haley, when you were talking about forced sterilization, says, do you not think that sterilization is still happening? Yeah,
it's still happening in many parts of the world, and I'm still concerned about what happens in prisons here in the United States. It's something that is now in the United States. It's not necessarily quite legal anymore, which it was very much allowed to be, but it is definitely still happening in lots of parts of the world. It's a big issue that I don't think is talked about that much anymore. Libby has a great suggestion. All those people who are alone, isolated, should think about joining Star Trek fan groups. That's what I did as a teenager. And, I think there's a lot of validity to that that's something all of us can do, is how do we help people around us who might be struggling, who might be alone? One of the big tragedies we've had in the United States, is, Larry, it's very sad to talk about this for many reasons. But
anti-social media?
Well, I was going to say school shootings. If you look at a lot of the people who have engaged in school shootings, a lot of them were really struggling, were alone, isolated, or were bullied. So what can we do to help those people who might be really struggling before something like this happens? And the real sad part about this, Larry, I was going to say is, I guess this is one way we can solve school shootings, is just to close all the schools in the United States because of coronavirus. It's so wild to me that that's what it took to kind of to stop that. Gosh. I like what Dan mentions.
Yes.
Remember the quote that says, "Reality is a shared narrative we all tell ourselves." That's a really it's a nice way to think about all of this. We're reading the comments here, folks. That's what we're doing here.
Right.
A lot of folks saying thank you. I think some folks are checking out. Linda says, thank you, docs. Always thought-provoking. Robert says, thanks, gentlemen. Always informational. We're always happy to be here with you.
Did we go so long that we outlasted the Galaxy Trek Virtual?
Carlos says, role-playing games are great socializers. I completely agree with that. Dan also said, great episode. Thanks, docs. Live long and prosper. Larry... Maybe we've outlasted the show.
Maybe they're trying to tell us something.
Well, Larry, it has been a pleasure to do this episode with you folks. We have a Facebook group. It is at facebook.com/groups/lifesupportlive. So we always run a survey there during the week to find out what episode you want us to talk about next. I think Jared had a recommendation for us to do an episode about adjusting to a new normal. So we'll add that to the poll for next week.
We go. Yeah. Any other ideas, guys? You could, the chat room here will go for just a few minutes too. So if any other ideas for future themes,
please let us
leave
know.
it with us. Yeah, well as when we do this, when you join our Facebook group over there at Life Support Live, join the page. It's we'll have to let you in, but it's no big deal. But every week when we do that poll, there's room to add in your own answer, and even if it doesn't win that week, almost everything eventually gets touched and wins. It's kind of like keep running for president, eventually you'll win, or whatever. Keep running for dog catcher, eventually you'll win. But one thing I did want to say, Ali, before we totally leave is, and I think you've got a slide for it, is you and I are doing a virtual event next Saturday, too.
Yes, we are.
So our friend Neil,
let's talk about that.
Some of you that are familiar with The Con of Wrath, my documentary that's, actually being worked on, Neil was my director of photography, and he's a game designer.
The Con of Wrath.
The Con of Wrath. Did I say The Wrath of Con?
I don't know what you said, but I just wanted to say the Con of Wrath. I love saying that.
Thank you for that, the Con of Wrath. So he organized, as conventions were shutting down, he organized Lockdown Con, and we're doing a virtual panel there with the great Andre Bormanis, who was former longtime science advisor on Star Trek, now of the Orville, and worked on his own series Mars, and worked on Cosmos #2. Anyway, and Jay Holton there, who's a writer on Supergirl. We're doing a panel about. I didn't put the topic up there. The panel is about optimism, in finding optimism in sci-fi, or the optimistic sci-fi. Making a comeback, which coming out of Trek, we're glad to see. I think the need never went away, but the suits and the bean counters all thought that dystopia was the cool thing there for 10, 15 years. But anyway, that's the panel topic. But we're going to be virtually live there at 2 for an hour. A week from today, which means we're going to come out of this and take a break and turn around and go into that. But there's a whole, and if you go to lockdowncon.com, there's a whole 3 days, 1 an hour of panels by people from across the sci-fi fantasy spectrum, writers and TV writers and authors and artists. And anyway, so more virtual programming out there. More of us.
More of us, if you're interested. Oh gosh, Heidi, that's hilarious. She says that picture of Ali looks like he can see right into yours. Oh, I wish I did have that power. That would be quite helpful in my line of work. I also want to mention, folks, if you're interested in, I know this whole show started around coronavirus. So if you're interested in learning more about the coronavirus, there's a series that just came out on Netflix called, from Vox and Netflix called Coronavirus Explained. It's 3 episodes. I'm in the 3rd episode. The 3rd episode is about how to cope with this situation. So if you want like a 20-minute quick overview about how to stay mentally healthy in this pandemic, check out Netflix Coronavirus Explained episode 3. I will see you there. So I am there. Larry, where can people find more of your work this week?
Oh, well, Larry Nemecek's Trekland, where you are on Facebook right now. That's the home for Tuesdays Live at 1 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday, 4 Eastern. We are going to have the last episode for now of Nonfiction Friday, which is a Zoom little meetup I created to get through COVID crisis. We're going to have a show and tell of people's favorite nonfiction Trek books. This last Friday, we did Letters to Star Trek, and Susan Sackett came by for my little show that keeps trying to be bigger than it is. That's our meetup. And the virtual con I mentioned. I do this wonderful thing on Saturdays at 10 a.m. now with. That's us right now. That's that. And please, if if you're looking for some Trek connection, if you're looking for some Star Trek that you don't get anywhere else, if you're a Star Trek fan that has no idea how much Star Trek you have no idea about, take advantage of that small Portal 47 deal. It's 3 months for the price of 2 at LarryNemecek.com. You can just go there and you'll see the button for it. We'd love to have you in the portal. A lot of Portales were on with us today. But everything about Trekland is me trying to, connect the past with the future, preserve the past, interpret, make sense of what's going on now with Trek. I guess that's kind of a metaphor for my life. I love history and I love current
That's
events.
true. That's true.
Anyway, see you there. At Larry Nemecek on Twitter is always easy.
Yeah, Larry and I are both pretty active on Twitter, although I say that and I was not very active. I haven't been active for a couple weeks. Life's been busy. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Mattu. And on the Psych Show, I've got a really fun episode coming out tomorrow. It's an interview with my dad for Father's Day. We talk. We're going to have a lot of fun in that one. And I also have an episode that will hopefully be coming out soon about scientific racism and psychology's racist origins. So stay tuned for that fun topic. And folks, we'll be back next week with another episode of Life Support Live. Can't wait to see you all there. Thanks for being here. And until then, live long and prosper.
Yep, LAMP, everybody. Trek well.